The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Worked really well. Sorry about that. Had myself on mute. So let's try that where you could actually hear me. This is Bob Celeste, and we're talking today about the DSCSA and pilot phase 2 studies, which is proof of concept. In our first studies around DSCSA and blockchain, we did more of a virtual pilot where we were using simulations to explore both the law, the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, and also technology such as blockchains and databases that could be used to form that interoperable system that we've been talking about for years. Again, I'll go through this again, where we are under antitrust caution in that we don't talk about prices, selling terms, territories, those type of things. If you feel like you were getting into those areas, please let me know, and we'll table the conversation until we speak to counsel. I will be presenting today the full deck, and then I'll open up the call for all of you so we can have see if we can have a conversation if there's not much noise on the line. Again, the center is a neutral nonprofit organization, and we perform studies that allow industry to explore complex topics such as the Drug Supply Chain Security Act and technologies such as blockchain. And we also provide education on those areas. So in phase 1, I thought the team did a tremendous effort in both breadth and depth in plumbing and understanding the Drug Supply Chain Security Act and having discussions around that, what it means and how it's applied. And also blockchain, the technology itself, how it works, what are the features, what are the challenges with it. And you'll see some of that in the presentation today because that work feeds into what we're talking about today, which is having real proof of concept pilots take place where we actually, teams put together blockchains and they also put together features that we've talked about in phase 1 and with information that we've developed in phase 1. So I'll talk a little bit about how we work studies within the center so you understand the next steps that will be taking place after this call. I'll talk about phase 1, what we did there, and what's available to the phase 2 team as we move forward into proof of concepts and then our next steps. So within the center, we again, as I said, we perform studies on topics that have a certain amount of complexity and nuance, and you could see that in a lot of these studies that you see here. Last year, we did a study for Drug Supply Chain Security Act and Master Data Management. The purpose of that study was to look at different ways that master data could be provided to trading partners throughout the supply chain in order to lessen the amount of data that was supplied through the DSCSA, let's say, transaction feeds. That study was completed and the white paper is available on our website. This past year, we've been working on a DSCSA and blockchain study, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll be talking about our next phase of this. And then we did do a survey of the companies that we've been working with. And there are 2 other studies that we'll be talking about this year around, first one around blockchain and cold chain. So if we do have an architecture that's working for sharing data, could we also share information about the status of the items that are moving through the supply chain from a temperature, pressure, light, humidity, or whatever measurement is needed through that process. And also another study to look at a number of, beyond DSCSA, but a number of regulations that are around the world, and what does that mean to a supply chain, and be able to model that kind of environment. So when we look at this, how we create studies, anyone can propose a study, and what we do is we'll help you develop that idea into what we would call a prospectus around what that study could be, how it would be formed, and how we would go about that. We then have webinars such as what we're having today to talk about it and start to socialize the study itself. That prospectus then becomes more of a charter for the group, so it becomes more official. And then if the study is funded by the community, we move forward into developing and working through the study itself. The center does not have membership fees. We support ourselves through studies themselves. So again, as I said, for this particular study, we have developed a study prospectus, which will be available shortly to all of you. As we start to work with companies that are interested in participating in the study and moving the study forward, we'll adjust that prospectus based on feedback from the group that will eventually become the working team. And then that becomes the charter for the team. It talks about how we handle issues, how we work together, meetings and calls and whatnot. And that provides our marching orders for the study itself. So what I wanted to talk about here is the phase 1 study and some of the things that we've done there that will become available to this phase 2 study. Some of you are part of that phase 1 study, so this will be very familiar to you. Others haven't and don't realize the amount of work that's been done by this team. We started the team with some focus areas. DSCSA, the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, is a very broad topic. We've been talking about it for years. Blockchain is a newer technology based on old technology, so it's not totally foreign, but it also has a lot of depth to it and nuance to it, and it is also changing very rapidly, even through this past year. So we wanted to pick a few focus areas that the study would look at to give us some bounds and some scope. The first one was, if you look at the DSCSA law for 2023, now there is some difference of opinion in how you interpret that part of the law, and that's reflected in some of our studies, or rather some of our models that we've put together. But essentially, if you need to retrieve previous transaction information from previous trading partners in the line of where the product had moved, in an interoperable system, the first thing you need to do is create or establish an electronic connection, sometimes between non-adjacent trading partners. So if you think about a retail pharmacy and a manufacturer, where the retailer may be purchasing through a wholesaler, they may need to reach back and get some information. So we need to be able to establish electronic connections before that interoperable system can start working between those two non-adjacent trading partners. The second thing is we need to be able to establish trust between two trading partners that are about to exchange this data. Trust on a few levels. Are the trading partners who they say they are? And have they actually had the product or own the product that's being discussed or information is traded on? So there's a number of layers around establishing trust between the two non-adjacent trading partner or even adjacent trading partners in order to start to exchange data. The third one actually becomes actually was one of the more difficult things that we addressed within phase 1. And that is being able to share information around DSCSA without inadvertently exposing proprietary information. So that sounds simple, that we start to exchange information. However, if you look at the kind of information that's called for in the DSCSA law, if you were to look at a certain amount of data, you may start to be able to build up patterns about the partner that you are exchanging data with. You may be able to start to make some projections on their inventory status, maybe when they ship, those type of things. And so we've tried to address in phase 1 how not to expose that kind of data and yet still comply with the law and provide the data that's necessary for the trading partners. Of course, number 4 is a given, but it's something that we need to always come back to make sure that we're not overburdening the supply chain partners or over engineering a solution. And so we're always looking toward whether we're actually reducing activity and not creating new activity. So we're sensitive to what the trading partners' processes are and when the appropriate time for either sharing data or making data available, given today's processes within internal supply chains. We're also cognizant of the fact that the industry would like to use this architecture for more than just regulatory compliance. And so you'll see in the designs where we've allowed for expansion beyond DSCSA. And really that's where I think a lot of companies feel the value is. DSCSA provides the framework or the architecture, if you will, and we can use that architecture for other value added activities. Lastly, and this is an area where we did not actually, we've talked about, but we haven't actually addressed within the group, and it may be the subject of a future study, how this all gets paid for, how it's funded, how does it operate, and how is it funded as it operates. As we started to have our discussions in phase 1, one of the things that started to emerge was sort of a model for the activities that needed to take place. And this is where I mentioned before about the breadth of the study and what we addressed within that study. It wasn't just about making a technology do something. It really was about trying to solve the issue of sharing information efficiently in the supply chain and allowing that architecture to be used for other value-added areas. And so you see here sort of submodels within the model that we built. And so each of the models that I discuss and show later actually has this concept in mind, that there's a governance area, and I'll go through what each one of these are, but the industry needs to come together to agree on rules for data sharing. There's a data persistence area where it may be a database solution, it may be a blockchain solution, it may be a combination solution. So some of the reference models have those aspects to them. There's a services submodel where solutions exist that interact with the blockchain or the database and provide that information to the supply chain participants. And then there are also the supply chain itself, which of course we know is highly complex. There are many players in the supply chain, and there are many ways they interact with each other. So we've got some simple submodels of manufacturer, wholesaler, dispenser, and we've got others that include other trading partners. Once we had that kind of framework developed, we started to look at how we provide information to the data persistence area and also how we retrieve information or query for information in order to support DSCSA and other industry processes. And so we've gone through this kind of process of defining a large model that fits together and then overlaying on top of that the steps that need to take place in order to add data to the persistence area and retrieve data. Once we have those kind of things worked out and rules affected, we've also in phase 1 identified a number of terms and defined them for the purposes of the study. We've exercised governance rules. We've defined the process flows, data flows, the data attributes that are shared, and also parameters for querying and examples of those queries. And you'll see some of that in a minute. We then went to a second phase where we actually use simulation software to bring alive those diagrams. So simulation software, we actually created it, we start to run it, and it actually starts to create data based on the DSCSA law or other aspects that we may be exploring within the group. So each of the models that we've gone through has this same pattern. We've associated where information is being moved to, what are the data rules around it, created a model, created a simulation, and the simulation creates a tremendous amount of data that we can start to analyze to see whether it is doing what folks in the supply chain expect it to do. Again, this was an exploratory study. Out of this came a number of what we call reference models or simulations, and each of those have some variance in them that I'll address later. So we've got some, again, exploratory nature. Some of these have no restrictions. Everybody gets to see all the data, and that is an interesting exercise in just understanding what information is out there and what it means to some processes that may be taking place. We've got reference models that push into that persistence area, blockchain or database, a minimal set of data, and then there's other data such as master data, data about products, data about customers and suppliers is held elsewhere, and we bring that together at another point. We also have models in here that instead of moving DSCSA data into the blockchain or database, they move the address of where that data exists, and then you would go elsewhere to retrieve the data. So there was a number of ideas that were brought up throughout the group, throughout the year, and they are all defined within one of these 8 models. So let's just take a look at some of these models or how we hold together these models so that it's understood. This is important because when we move to proof of concept, which is our next phase, which is what we're talking about today, all of this material will be available to the phase 2 team in order to build out real proof of concepts with the actual technologies. So again, as I said, there was an overall model that had a number of submodels. The beauty of this is that we can plug and play these submodels as there are variations in each one. So I'll just go through quickly what's inside of each one of these, and then you'll start to see how we use those. So if we look at the governance submodel, and really this is a manual activity of the industry coming together and developing data access rules, governance rules that need to be applied, whether it's a set of databases or whether it's blockchain technology that will hold the data. Those rules in how we're managing the phase 1 group, those rules go to a rules application body, essentially someone or somebody that would take the English rules and convert that into computer code that would enforce those rules. That code was then validated, and that validation information is supplied back to the governance body to make sure that what they asked for is what was developed, and then there will be permission to publish those applications, or in the case of blockchain smart contracts, and then they would be published. So an example of some rules that we've, in a very simple rule of properly formatted data. So if you think of a national drug code or a global trade item number, that information that ends up in the data persistence area needs to be quality data. And so at the services submodel layer and probably at the data persistence layer, there would be edits to make sure that the data is properly formatted. Another rule, which is a little bit more extensive, is something that you see here, such as a shipping event cannot be added unless there is a commissioning event. So as we move product through the supply chain, items are commissioned, they're given an identifier, and then they go through other events such as packing and unpacking and shipping and receiving and so on. And so this rule looks pretty innocuous, that it seems pretty obvious that you can't ship something unless you've created it. However, we do know in the supply chain, and we start to exercise some of the supply chain processes, that there are times where shipments arrive before the information arrives. It's possible that the supplier does batch processing at night, and so maybe the information doesn't arrive. So a rule like this could cause issues. It is a rule that should eventually, as the data catches up with the product, be in effect. But we experimented with what happens if you put this rule into effect, and then in that situation that I just explained, what are the ramifications of that? So a number of rules that we've gone through and embedded in these models have been vetted and tested within the phase one group. In order not to confuse some issues, and again, this is balancing between complying with the SCSA and also providing an architecture that the industry can use for other value-added processes. And so we've identified for each rule that was created the type of rule that it is. Was it something that came out of the DSCSA that the group felt was explicitly because of the DSCSA law? Was it something that's just a business practice or the way we need to do things within the supply chain? Or was it something that in the example that we were, or the model that we were working on, was a rule that was agreed upon between only two trading partners? Maybe two trading partners decide they want to share additional data for whatever purposes they have. So we're trying to test that this system or architecture can manage DSCSA rules, business practice rules, and rules between individual trading partners or trading partner groups. And so we've gone through that process and talked about how that can occur given the technology of either databases or blockchain. And again, as I mentioned, some of the data persistence submodels have a blockchain architecture to them. Some have traditional database designs. In the supply chain submodel, this is where we have had a tremendous amount of discussions about how the supply chain works, how the individual supply chain trading partners interpret the DSCSA law and what they need and when they need it. And so we've got some very simple models. You see here a manufacturer, a wholesaler, and a hospital. We've got other models that show more complex processing being done in each one of those environments. And then we've got models that include other trading partners, such as contract manufacturers, 3PLs, hospitals, retailers, and different sizes of all of those. Large manufacturers, small manufacturers, some have warehousing, retail dispensers that may be an individual dispenser without a warehouse, and so on. So we've got some variation in the size and the amount of trading partners and the processes that they have to perform and where they would need this data. Actually, this one actually should be pointing at the services submodel, but from the services submodel, there are a number of services that would most likely be necessary to be able to interact with the supply chain and provide or query the blockchain or database solution for in the data persistence area. And some of those access services may also include other services, such as master data services, where that master data or data about the product, data about the customer or the supplier is held elsewhere and is combined by those services with the data that's available in the blockchain or the data persistence area in order to provide more rich information about what took place, what the product was, and who it was transacted by. We also have models where we also look at authentication of the trading partners, and that may include whether their licenses are up to date. So there are some models that provide that kind of information within the services area. So that's just an overall picture of what we've done from in phase one of understanding how things could work, understanding how the industry needs to come together to decide on some rules and how those rules would be implemented within a blockchain solution, let's say. What else is available to our phase 2 team will be a lot of the information that we've captured in phase 1, which is the data attributes themselves, where they sit at any point in time within our models, and how they're described. So that'll provide a good base layer for our phase 2 team. We also looked at how information is moved up into that data persistence area, whether that's a blockchain or a database solution. So the steps that take place and the decisions that are made along the way and the quality checks that are made. And we also looked at what are the processes or steps that need to take place in order to retrieve that data, both validation of the trading partners that are querying and being queried, and also, as I said before, in the case where, for example, master data is separate from the blockchain, how do we retrieve that data also and combine it with the blockchain data? So all of this is available for our phase 2 team. So let's talk about phase 2 and what's being envisioned here. And of course, as the group starts to form, some of this may change. Certainly in phase 1, we had some initial thoughts, and then as the group started to form, we started to address some areas and add some things to what the phase 1 team did. But as far as phase 2 goes, the overall concept is that this is a proof of concept. We're moving from a virtual environment of the reference model simulations to a real environment. We'll be dealing with the actual technology of blockchain and databases. So the concept is that participants would come together and first determine the set of features that are most desirable in a proof of concept. We worked through a lot of issues in phase 1. Not all of those may be needed to be part of a proof of concept, but they're all available for the phase 2 team to discuss and determine whether they'd like to see those issues actually implemented in the technology in order to understand it better. We'll also be talking about matching the technology companies with industry for the proof of concept set. So some of the features that we've identified in phase 1, we may see one or more proof of concepts take place. We may see different solutions be implemented and those interacting with each other in this phase 2. And then the technology companies that are willing and part of the group will be creating working demonstration of using the technology for the particular scenario or feature that was identified in step 1. The industry, as we have these discussions, same as we did in phase 1, will be guiding the development of these proof of concepts by continuing to advise on how the supply chain works, what are the issues, what are the nuances as these proof of concepts start to develop. From the industry or from the center, we can provide data sets for these demonstrations, and I'll show you some of that in a minute. The proof of concept pilots themselves are free to demonstrate value-added processes. So we're looking at the processes that we've identified in phase 1. However, I know that many people are interested in things beyond just DSCSA compliance, and there have been solutions created and thoughts created around other areas that could be useful. And so that's available to the companies that would be developing these proof of concepts if they would like to add some other information that might be of interest to the supply chain participants. As far as timing, and we'll have many discussions on timing and feasibility of all of this, the thoughts right now is that throughout the fall, throughout the next month or two, we'll be organizing the study. We'll be looking at the feature set for selection, and then we'll start to pair up groups or companies that will address some of these features. As we move into the winter, we'll start seeing more development on the proof of concepts, and then we're targeting April. Again, we'll be discussing this with the participants as far as an event that to take place to demonstrate all of this, so we could all explore the proof of concepts. We could all have time to discuss them and understand them. So again, coming out of phase one, we've developed quite a large set of information that's important and interesting for folks that would attempt to develop some proof of concept pilots around this, and this will be available to the group. So we've documented governance variations around data provisioning and access rules. Again, we have the 3 levels of rules: DSCSA, industry practice, and individual ones. There's also issues around version control that I believe that the industry and that the participants will like to see demonstrated in some of these proof of concepts. From the data persistence area, the technology itself, whether it's a single blockchain, multiple blockchains, cloud database combination, I think the thought that this would ever turn out to be one architecture, I've been asked that a number of times, and I really think that there's going to be a number of places where data exists that need to be brought together. And so we almost see blockchain as another utility, just as we see clouds and database and so forth. So it may be a combination of things that eventually take place that we pull information from. So other areas that from a data persistence area, immutability, scalability, confidentiality, seeing these things actually demonstrated in proof of concepts, how we translate the governance rules into the actual technology, whether they're smart contracts or stored procedures or what have you, data storage options, what do we do with where the DSCSA data, again, whether we're pushing the data itself up into the blockchain or database solution, or whether we're pushing pointers to other repositories where that data would exist. And then there's a number of options within the processes that we're supporting in that blockchain or database solution. So both forward and reverse logistics, we've discussed error corrections and how that could take place, how to query the data. We've also talked about subjects that are inside of the DSCSA law, such as suspect illegitimate drugs and how they may be cleared. And we've also talked about nefarious behavior. What happens if someone tries to introduce a counterfeit or a duplicate identity into the persistence area? What happens if there is theft? What happens if something has gone outside of its expiration date? Things like that. That's not necessarily a nefarious activity, but just something that happens that you wouldn't want to dispense that drug. Then there are variations within the trading partners itself, from how they decide to implement inference, so inference policies, data update policies, whether they do it nightly, whether they do it near real term, also how they interpret the law. So there are differences in our models in all of these areas. So we've got some simulated manufacturers that some of them are updating information in real time, others are doing it in a batch mode, others are doing it differently. Same thing with inference policy. We've got a lot of information from our phase 1 study on how that could take place and how someone or a company may implement that. That's available to the proof of concept group to be able to demonstrate. Of course, we've got our different trading partners, manufacturers, contract manufacturers, and so on. that we would like to see in these proof of concepts, and that we would like to see their data being expressed in the proof of concepts. Lastly, some serious variations. So there are different repositories that could be expressed in a proof of concept. Master data being held outside of the blockchain in other areas, traditional areas where it's being held today, and how that could interact with this this kind of architecture. Event repositories that may be held outside of the data persistence area. Also demonstrating how quality checks are being done on the data before it is moved into the persistence area. So all of these things are available to the phase 2 team in order to create a number of things that would like to be seen in proof of concepts. Quite a bit. I mean, this actually, sort of speaks to the work of the phase 1 team, and how deep and wide the discussions have ranged, and the documentation that will be available to the phase 2 team. Lastly, we've touched on in phase 1 some performance measures, both in terms of scalability, time to insert, time to verify, time to query, but also the amount of time the trading partner. We also have some. I guess this is around scalability. The amount of time and the amount of updates or queries that may take place within a given period of time, based on a particular trading partner's activities. So the largest example that we've had is large wholesalers and the period of time that they have in order to process verification, let's say. And so that will be part of what's available to the phase 2 in order to demonstrate that the technology can be managed at the scale it needs to be for the industry. So some of the support to the proof of concept pilots that will take place in phase 2. Again, we've got the models that we've developed, and those models create a tremendous amount of data. So we'll be able to supply that to the proof of concept pilots, provide data as they move through the supply chain, and as they start to push data up there. We could produce tremendous amount of data in the case where we're maybe looking at scalability, to be able to test that out. So we've also got, from phase 1, term definitions, governance rules, process flows, data flows, quite a bit of information that will help folks bring together these proof of concepts. So lastly, what's next? Again, I just bring up how we go about developing studies and moving through studies. So we're going to be continuing for the next few weeks these introduction webinars to socialize with the community what we're doing, what the group is going to be doing, how we'll be doing it, and taking some feedback from the community yourselves. We'll then move into a next phase, and this will only be in a few weeks, which are pre-launch calls. And what's meant by that is that as companies join the study and they work through the paperwork, we don't want to really have a big blank space of time that nothing happens. And so we actually start what we call pre-launch calls with companies that are moving toward being part of the study. And then this is sort of our gathering and organizing and looking at and making adjustments to the charter and things like that, and actually moving forward into the study itself. And then we'll move in with scheduled calls and meetings for the study team. So I hope that was helpful for all of you to understand where we've been in phase 1, where we see phase 2 being organized and going. I'll try to open up the discussion and see if I could do this here in case there are questions. course, I don't seem to be able to do that. Maybe the way I've configured this, I'm sorry about that. If you do have questions, or if you'd like to discuss anything, if I can answer anything for you, I think there is that chat area. If you do have a question, if not, I'll try to get this straightened out for our next call. If not, then please feel free, give me a call, drop me an email. Be glad to talk to you about the phase 2 activities and your participation in there, and any questions you have or suggestions you have for how this can be more value to you. I think that it's going to, the things that we've talked about in phase 1 have been tremendously valuable, and I think we've addressed a lot of the issues very deeply and also very broadly in how it all connects together: the supply chain, solutions, blockchain, governance. We've handled a lot of issues broadly and in a very detailed manner also. So all of that information will be available to the phase 2 team, which I think will be a great boost into moving into proof of concept pilots. So with that, if you do have questions, please send me a note, give me a call. You will see a number of these webinars take place over the next few weeks, and we'll start to work with you as far as moving into the pre-launch calls where we can start discussing and start to either add to or better define what will take place within the proof of concept pilots. Thank you for your time today. I'll make sure our next one I'm able to take you off mute. I'm sorry about that. And again, if you have any questions, give me a call or drop me a line. So I'll close out the session now, and I'll be posting this onto our website. So if you'd like to review the slides or the conversation today, you'll be able to.